Okay, so we're going to continue our discussion about the 1848 revolutions, and before we get into some of the conservative measures that inspire these revolutions in different countries, we should also think about why some of the conditions of 19th century Europe are bringing up a lot of tensions that might lead to revolution in the mid 19th century. So first, let's go back to the Industrial Revolution and think about how this might make certain classes kind of dissatisfied with their conditions, and also why this might be sort of a reaction against an overly authoritative government. So, as the middle class experiences more prosperity in various European countries, particularly in Western Europe, because of the Industrial Revolution, they are looking more towards a liberal government, right? This doesn't mean that they, again, we talked about liberalism in the last videos. This doesn't mean that they advocate the equal rights for all, but they certainly want their own rights to be expanded. So this means that they don't want the government to be as authoritative. And so, in general, changes to the economy is a challenge to traditional governmental leadership. Rapid industrialization is also going to cause some sort of tension with the different classes in Europe, particularly living conditions, the middle class in general, as we see modifications in transportation systems, like the invention of the electric streetcar, and like in Paris in particular, changing the layout of roads to make them wider, ultimately improving access to the outlying areas of the city. We'll see improved living conditions for the middle class in particular. Um, the working class is going to experience a little bit more difficulty improving their living conditions, so this could also inspire some more socialist reactions to this situations in cities. Um, in general, the artisan class or the sort of labor aristocracy is experiencing some challenges. They are not middle class, but they also sort of want to distinguish themselves from the semi-skilled and unskilled laborers in the working class. So this is going to make them uh, start to think about what their position in society is, and whether or not they should sort of revolt against traditional authoritative figures. Population pressure is also going to inspire some revolutions. And we are most likely familiar with Thomas Malthus's thesis that food production will not be able to keep up with the increase in population. We already talked about new ideologies, so these are all going to put pressure on the traditional, more conservative ideologies. The increase in romantic literature, art, music is also going to inspire these revolutions, kind of a turn more towards emotion than than realism, which we'll talk about in a future chapter. Rationalism, right? Emotion is going to inspire some kind of idealistic movements in various European countries. We're also going to think about how some of these revolutions are inspired due to some kind of conservative or repressive measures by various governments. We'll talk about the Carlsbad decrees and the Corn laws in a future slide. So also, we're going to see if there is an agricultural crisis and the government fails to respond to it adequately, this is going to lead to rebellion. So poor harvests, or in Ireland in particular, the potato famine is going to lead to serious tensions in these countries between the populations that are affected most adversely, um, versus populations that may be faring better, or versus the government. We're also going to see that certain investments that were very lucrative in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution are going to reach a point where the bubble bursts, so to speak. People who invest in railroads or the iron and coal industry are not going to experience as much prosperity, so they're going to be increasingly dissatisfied, might lead them to protest against the government in particular. We're also going to see an increase in unemployment, and of course, this might lead uh, this might lead various classes to actually unite together and, of course, see the government as a scapegoat to their economic situations. Um, Now, we'll see that the first revolution of 1848 takes place in Paris, but it's not fair to say that they're centered in Paris, because as you can see on this map, many revolutions are taking place farther east, in Prussia and in the Austrian Empire. So we'll focus on those in particular. One of the reasons why these revolutions ultimately fail is because they're not really organized. Um, Partly due to the fact that they're inspired by various reasons. Um, Also because you're going to see that certain ideologies prevail more in different countries, right? So there's no kind of centered ideology that is kind of fueling these revolutions. We're going to see that there's no real cohesion between the various revolutionary leaders in different countries or regions. And in certain countries, there actually is no revolution. The government is able to kind of find a peaceful way to appease some of the dissatisfactions of the citizens. So that's one of the major reasons why these revolutions ultimately result in failure. Okay, talking about specific areas, in Greece, we're going to see this isn't really, a liberal revolution, but it's important to realize that this is the time when Greece gains its independence. Um, Prior to 1821, Greece was ruled by the Ottomans, but you're going to see that, this is inspired by liberal movements in many ways. Uh, there is a kind of desire from various Western European countries for Greece to become independent from the Ottomans for a number of reasons. First off, independence movements tend to be inspired by liberalism, and we're going to see an increase in liberalism in various Western European countries. So England, France, and Russia in particular are helping Greece achieve its revolution. You could also say that this is inspired due to religious unity to a large part, because Greece is making a Christian appeal to these Western European countries for help against the Ottoman Empire. And of course, if we remember, the Ottomans are Muslim, so there's kind of a desire from the Western European countries to have a Christian power in Greece. So after an 8-year revolution, you're going to see that Greece successfully gains its independence from the Ottomans due to the military assistance from England, France, and Russia. In addition to the Turks fighting against Greece, you're also going to see Egyptian forces fight against Greece, and both of them will be defeated by Western Europe and by, of course, the Greek revolutionaries. Why does this matter? Well, in previous discussions, we talked about how the Congress of Europe was very conservative in nature. We're going to start to see a movement away from this conservatism because 3 out of the 5 members of the Council of Europe, so again, England, France, and Russia, are actually going to be turning more in a liberal direction by aiding Greece. Okay, but before we get to the liberalist movements of the revolutions of 1848, we need to think about what ideology they are reacting against, and of course, this is conservatism. So, in general, what is conservatism? I actually believe here's actually a slide that gives you a more general overview of conservatism. So, kind of goes without saying that it's reacting against liberalism, that it was seen as a popular alternative to people who were frightened by the violence, terror, and social disorder of the French Revolution. Um, there are certain countries that are drawn, or certain governments, I should say, that are drawn towards conservatism in particular. Those are Austria, Prussia, and England, and we'll talk about these more specifically. So not surprisingly, these are countries that were fighting in the coalitions against France during the revolution, and also they're going to be the major powers in the Congress of Vienna. Um, so, specific examples of conservatism. Austria is a very prime example of a conservative government. Remember that Austria is ruled by Prince Metternich, who is seen as kind of the father of conservatism. And one of the major reasons why Austrian government is experiencing a turn towards conservatism is because Austria is very multi-ethnic, right? They don't have a homogenous population. And so because of this, there's a threat to the Austrian government of more liberalist movements and maybe also a turn um, more towards nationalism and nationalism kind of against an authoritarian rule. Um, the idea that Austria, since it's forming as a kind of more cohesive empire, there might be a trend of this sort of multi-ethnic population to kind of organize in a way that goes against the more authoritative Habsburg rule. In particular, liberalism is um, a very popular idea in universities, right? So this inspires the Carlsbad degrees. It's in bold because it's important to be familiar with the Carlsbad degrees. What it is an effort um, by the government to censor liberalist ideas, particularly in universities. What they do is any kind of material that is liberal in nature, also material that advocates Austrian unification in particular, is censored, right? And another example of how uh, Austria is seen as conservative is the organization of the German Confederation. We already talked about this in the French Revolution chapter, right? This is kind of leftover from Hitler's organization of Germany. Um, so we have less states, right? They also are governed by a Diet, which is another word for an assembly, right? And Austria acts as the president of the Diet. So we're going to see that Austria is seen as the most authoritative figure in the German Confederation, and this is something that certain people in the German Confederation are going to react against. Prussia is also experiencing a turn back towards conservatism. Um, so this is also going to inspire revolutionary movements in Prussia specifically. So you're going to see initially um, that there is some liberalism in Prussia left over from the French Revolution. Remember that Napoleon actually abolishes serfdom in Prussia during the Revolution. So this is one thing that is going to kind of make liberalism stick around to a certain extent in Prussia. However, you're going to see that the way the government saw liberalism in Prussia was really a way to make the government more efficient and not really to extend liberal ideas, especially freedom of speech, freedom of expression. These were things that the Prussian government really didn't want to extend to all of the Prussian population. So eventually, you're going to see that the Prussian government, along with the traditional ruling class, the Junkers, are going to kind of follow Metternich's lead in Austria and start to repress liberal and nationalist movements in Prussia. Okay, conservatism. Actually, I have another slide that is a little bit more detailed here. Okay, so conservatism in England as well. So we're going to see that in particular um, there is a first a move to kind of adjust the government to adapt to some more to kind of a change in the population pattern as a result of the Industrial Revolution, right? So one of the kind of more liberal achievements early on in England is the Reform Bill of 1832. So because you have new population patterns as a result of the Industrial Revolution, what the Reform Bill does is it kind of it gets rid of certain electoral districts in rural areas, right, that have a much smaller representation of the population. These were seen as rotten boroughs. So the Reform Bill gets rid of this, right? We're going to see new manufacturing districts actually get more representation in the government. This is going to make the voting population go up. About 6% of the population voted prior to the Reform Bill, and it doubles to 12% following the Reform Bill. So it's not a huge percent of the population that's voting, but still much greater. So you're going to see that for a temporary period of time, this is going to kind of appease some of the class conflict in Britain. So this is seen as a more liberal movement. The Chartists also are going to be influential in Britain. So, what the Chartists are a group of people that are advocating universal suffrage. Um, so, at first, the Chartists are